My sister-in-law stood there at my charity event with her hand out asking everyone to help her raise money while the real charity we were supporting got pushed aside until I received a text message that exposed her entire scheme to everyone in the most public way possible. I, 26F, have always prided myself on organizing events that make a difference in people's lives, and this year's charity gala for the Children's Hospital was going to be my biggest achievement yet. My sister-in-law, Brittany, 28F, had been circling me like a vulture all week, knowing that I would have access to wealthy donors and influential people at this event. She had this way of making everything about herself and turning other people's successes into opportunities for her own gain. The text message I would receive later that night would give me the perfect ammunition to expose her for what she really was in front of everyone who mattered. The Children's Hospital had been treating kids with rare diseases for over 50 years, and every dollar we raised would go directly to buying new equipment for their pediatric oncology ward. I had spent 6 months planning every detail from the silent auction items to the 5-course meal that would be served to our 300 guests. My team and I had secured donations from local businesses and convinced several celebrities to attend, which would guarantee media coverage and more awareness for the cause. The ballroom at the Grand Marquis Hotel had been transformed into an elegant wonderland with crystal chandeliers and centerpieces made of white roses that sparkled under the soft lighting. The preparation for this event had consumed my life for months, and I had personally overseen every aspect to ensure nothing would go wrong. The caterers had been carefully selected after multiple tastings, and the entertainment was a renowned jazz quartet that had played at events for governors and senators. Every table setting had been inspected, and the seating chart had been strategically arranged to encourage maximum donations by placing generous donors next to those who might need a little friendly competition to open their wallets. The auction items ranged from exotic vacations to signed memorabilia from sports legends, and each one had been authenticated and beautifully displayed. Brittany had shown up uninvited, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and immediately started working the room like she was the host of the event. She had this talent for inserting herself into conversations and making people think she was important when really she was just riding on the coattails of anyone who would let her. I watched her from across the room as she laughed too loudly at someone's joke and touched their arm in that fake, familiar way she had perfected over the years. Her jewelry glittered under the lights, and I recognized the necklace as one she had guilt-tripped Tom's mother into buying for her last Christmas. The history between Brittany and me went back to when Tom and I first started dating 8 years ago. She had immediately seen me as competition for her brother's attention and money. Every family gathering became a performance where she would try to embarrass me or make me look bad in front of Tom's parents. She would tell stories about Tom's ex-girlfriends and how perfect they were, or she would criticize my cooking, my clothes, my career, anything she could think of to diminish me. When Tom proposed, she actually told him he was making a mistake in front of the entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. My husband Tom had warned me that she might try something tonight, but I had hoped she would have enough decency to respect what this event was really about. He knew his sister better than anyone and had spent years cleaning up her messes and making excuses for her behavior to their parents. He had paid off her credit cards more times than he could count and had hired lawyers to get her out of legal trouble when her schemes went wrong. But he had finally reached his limit last year when she had tried to steal money from their grandmother's estate while the poor woman was still alive. The relationship between Tom and Brittany had always been complicated because their parents had enabled her behavior since childhood. She was the baby of the family and could do no wrong in their eyes, even when the evidence of her wrongdoing was staring them in the face. They had bailed her out of every situation and never let her face real consequences, which had created the monster who was now prowling around my charity event looking for her next mark. Tom had tried to warn them, but they always accused him of being jealous or not understanding his sister's creative spirit. The evening started beautifully, with guests arriving in their finest attire and the champagne flowing as people mingled and bid on auction items. The mayor gave a touching speech about the importance of supporting our local hospital, and several parents whose children had been treated there shared their stories. One mother broke down, crying, as she described how the doctors had saved her daughter's life, and the entire room was moved to tears. The atmosphere was perfect, with everyone feeling generous and connected to the cause. I was standing near the dessert table making sure everything was running smoothly when Brittany cornered me with that look in her eyes that meant she wanted something. She grabbed my arm and pulled me aside with a grip that was just a little too tight to be friendly. Her perfume was overwhelming, and I could smell wine on her breath, even though the event had just started. Her eyes had that glassy look that meant she had been pre-gaming before arriving, which was typical for her when she was nervous about asking for something. She positioned herself between me and the rest of the room so I couldn't easily escape, and I knew I was trapped until she said whatever she had come to say. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said. Brittany, this really isn't the time," I said. I'm in the middle of running this event. "It will only take a minute," she said. "I have this amazing opportunity that I need your help with." "What kind of opportunity?" I said, already knowing where this was going. "I'm starting a new business," she said. "It's going to revolutionize the pet care industry." "That's great," I said, "but I really need to get back to the guests." "Wait," she said, "I need investors, and I thought since you have all these rich people here tonight, you could introduce me to some of them." "Brittany, this is a charity event for sick children," I said. "These people are here to support the hospital, not to hear business pitches." "But my business is like a charity too," she said. "I'm going to be helping animals." "How is a luxury dog grooming service a charity?" I said. "Because I'll be giving a percentage of profits to animal shelters," she said. "Eventually." "How much of a percentage?" I said. "We haven't worked out all the details yet," she said, but that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I said. "The point is that you could help me raise money tonight," she said. "Just tell people that I'm collecting donations for my charity." "But you're not collecting donations for charity," I said. "You're looking for investors for your business." "Same difference," she said. "Money is money." "No, it's not the same at all," I said. These people came here to support sick children, not to fund your latest scheme." Her face started turning red, and I could see her jaw clenching the way it did when she wasn't getting what she wanted. She had always been like this since we first met, throwing tantrums when things didn't go her way. I remembered the time she had screamed at Tom for an hour because he wouldn't co-sign a loan for her to buy a sports car she couldn't afford. She had called him every name in the book and had even threatened to tell their parents he was abusing her if he didn't give in. That was when Tom had started setting boundaries with her, which she had never forgiven him for. "A scheme," she said, raising her voice. "How dare you call my legitimate business a scheme?" "Because that's what it is," I said. "Just like your makeup line that failed, and your jewelry business that never got off the ground, and your fitness coaching that lasted exactly 2 weeks. Those were learning experiences," she said. "This time is different." "It's always different with you," I said. "But it always ends the same way, with you asking for money and never paying anyone back." "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she said loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Here I am trying to help animals, and you won't even introduce me to a few people." Several heads turned in our direction, and I could feel my cheeks burning with embarrassment. The hospital director was standing just a few feet away, and I saw him glance over with concern. This was exactly what I had been afraid of when I saw Brittany arrive. She had no respect for appropriate behavior and would cause a scene anywhere if she thought it would help her get what she wanted. I had seen her do this at restaurants when she wanted free meals and at stores when she wanted discounts. She knew that most people would give in just to avoid the public embarrassment. "Keep your voice down," I said. "You're making a scene." "Maybe I should make a scene," she said. "Maybe people should know what kind of person you really are." "What's that supposed to mean?" I said. "It means that you pretend to care about charity, but you won't even help your own family," she said. You're just a hypocrite who uses these events to make yourself look good. That's enough, I said. You need to leave. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I have just as much right to be here as anyone else. Actually, you don't, I said. You weren't invited, and you didn't buy a ticket. Tom invited me, she said. He's my brother, and he said I could come. Tom did not invite you, I said. He specifically told me he didn't mention the event to you. Well, someone told me about it, she said, and here I am. The conversation was attracting more attention now, and I could see people whispering to each other while trying not to stare directly at us. One of my committee members started walking over looking concerned, but I shook my head slightly to let her know I was handling it. The last thing I needed was for this to escalate into a bigger confrontation that would overshadow the entire evening, but Brittany seemed determined to create as much drama as possible, and I could see her gearing up for an even bigger performance. Yes, here you are trying to scam money from people at a charity event, I said. It's not a scam, she said. Why are you being so difficult about this? Because I have integrity, I said. Something you wouldn't understand. Integrity, she said, laughing in that mean way she had. You mean being cheap and selfish? I mean not lying to people about where their money is going, I said. You know what your problem is, she said. You think you're better than everyone else. No, I don't, I said. Yes, you do, she said. You walk around acting all high and mighty with your perfect events and your perfect life. My life isn't perfect, I said. Please, she said. You have everything handed to you on a silver platter. I work hard for everything I have, I said. Sure you do, she said. It must be so hard being married to a successful lawyer and playing party planner. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit because I had worked incredibly hard to build my career. I had started as an unpaid intern at an event company and had worked my way up through long hours and dedication. I had spent years learning every aspect of the business, from vendor negotiations to crisis management. My success had nothing to do with Tom's money and everything to do with my own determination and skill. But Brittany would never acknowledge that because it didn't fit her narrative of me as a gold digger who had stolen her brother away. Event planning is a real career, I said. Whatever helps you sleep at night, she said. The point is, you could help me, but you're choosing not to. I'm choosing to protect these donors from your lies, I said. They're not lies, she said. I really am going to help animals. When, I said, after you've spent all their money on vacations and designer clothes? I don't take vacations, she said. You were literally in Miami last month, I said. That was for business, she said. What business? I said. Networking, she said. You wouldn't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You wanted a free trip, so you convinced someone to pay for it. That's not what happened, she said. Then what did happen? I said. I was meeting with potential partners, she said. At the beach, I said. Business happens everywhere, she said. Like, not just in boring offices. Right, I said. And I suppose the spa treatments were also business related. Self-care is important for entrepreneurs, she said. You're not an entrepreneur, I said. You're a con artist. The words hung in the air between us, and I saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. She had been called many things over the years, but somehow being called a con artist to her face seemed to hit differently. Maybe it was because, deep down, she knew it was true. Or maybe it was because I had said it so calmly, without any emotion. Either way, I could see that I'd crossed a line with her and she was about to escalate things to a level that would be hard to come back from. How dare you, she said, even louder now. I'm trying to build something meaningful. No, you're trying to get other people to pay for your lifestyle. I said, that's rich coming from someone who married for money. She said, I didn't marry Tom for money. I said, I married him because I love him. Sure you did, she said, and it's just a coincidence that he happens to be loaded. Tom and I were together long before he made partner at his firm, and I said, but you knew he would be successful. She said, you're not stupid. You're right, I'm not stupid, Alex, I said, which is why I'm not giving you access to these donors. Fine, she said, I'll just talk to them myself. You do that, and I'll have security escort you out, I said. You wouldn't dare, she said. Try me, I said. Tom would never forgive you for humiliating me like that, she said. Tom is the one who told me to watch out for you tonight, I said. You're lying, she said. Call him and ask, I said. He's at the bar. I could see her weighing her options and trying to decide if I was bluffing. The truth was that Tom had been very clear about not wanting her at the event and had even offered to hire security specifically to keep her out if necessary. He had predicted almost exactly how this conversation would go and had told me not to give in no matter what she said or did. He knew that once she got her hooks into one donor, she would work her way through the entire room, and by the end of the night, she would have damaged not only the event, but also my reputation as an organizer. I don't need his permission to be here, she said. Actually, you do, since you didn't pay for a ticket, I said. This is ridiculous, she said. All I'm asking for is a tiny favor. Lying to people isn't a tiny favor, I said. It's not lying if I really do plan to help animals eventually, she said. That's exactly what lying is, I said. You're impossible, she said. No wonder Tom complains about you. Tom doesn't complain about me, I said. He does to me, she said. He tells me everything. No, he doesn't, I said. You're just trying to hurt me because you're not getting what you want. I'm trying to help you see what everyone else already knows, she said. Which is what exactly, I said. That you're a uptight control freak who thinks she's saving the world with her little parties, she said. The insult was so petty and childish that I almost laughed, but I could see that she was completely serious. In her mind, these events that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for important causes were just little parties. The months of planning and coordination meant nothing to her. The lives that were saved and families that were helped were irrelevant. All she saw was an opportunity she was being denied and someone she could blame for her own failures. It was pathetic and sad, but also infuriating. These events raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for important causes, I said. And how much of that goes in your pocket? She said. None of it, I said. I donate my time. Sure you do, she said. I bet you're skimming off the top. That's illegal and disgusting, I said. But profitable, she said. Which is why you won't help me. I won't help you because you're trying to fraud people, I said. It's not fraud if they willingly give me money, she said. It is if you lie about what the money is for, I said. I'm not lying, she said. I'm just being creative with the truth. That's literally what lying is, I said. You're so black and white about everything, she said. Like, life isn't that simple. Actually, it is, I said. Like, one thing, you either tell the truth or you don't. Says the woman who pretends to be happy in her marriage, right? She said. The accusation caught me off guard because Tom and I were genuinely happy together. We had our challenges like any couple, but we loved each other deeply and supported each other's dreams. The idea that Brittany thought our marriage was fake said more about her inability to recognize real love than it did about our relationship. She had never had a relationship last more than a few months because she always revealed her true nature eventually and people ran away. She couldn't conceive of a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I am happy in my marriage, I said. Then why does Tom spend so much time at work? She said. Because he's building his career, I said. Or because he's avoiding you, she said. You're just being cruel now, I said. I'm being honest, she said. Something you claim to value. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, I said. Not really, she said. The truth hurts sometimes. You wouldn't know the truth if it hit you in the face. I said. And you wouldn't know a real opportunity if it was standing right in front of you, she said. You're not an opportunity, I said. You're a liability. I'm family, she said. That doesn't mean I have to enable your bad behavior, I said. The conversation had been going in circles for what felt like hours, but had probably only been 10 minutes. More people were watching now, and I could see some of them pulling out their phones, probably texting about the drama they were witnessing. This was exactly what I had wanted to avoid, but Brittany seemed to thrive on the attention, even if it was negative. She had positioned herself so that her voice would carry across the room, and every accusation she made was clearly audible to anyone within 20 feet of us. "Bad behavior," she said. "I'm trying to start a business." "No, you're trying to get something for nothing, like always," I said. "I've never asked you for anything before," she said. "You asked me for $5,000 6 months ago," I said. "That was a loan," she said. "That you never paid back," I said. "I'm still working on it," she said. "And the 3,000 before that," I said. "That was an investment," she said. "In what?" I said. "My future," she said. "You spent it on a handbag," I said. It was a business expense," she said. "How is a Chanel bag a business expense?" I said. "Image is everything in business," she said. "Meeks, you should know that." I wanted to point out that my image was built on delivering excellent events and maintaining a spotless reputation, not on carrying expensive accessories, but I knew it would be pointless. In Brittany's world, appearance was everything, and substance was nothing. She believed that if she looked successful, people would give her money and she wouldn't actually have to do any work. It was a philosophy that had gotten her this far, but it was finally catching up with her as more and more people recognized her patterns. "I know that you're full of excuses," I said. "And you're full of judgment," she said. "I'm full of common sense," I said. "Common sense would be helping family when they need it," she said. "You don't need help," I said. "You need to get a real job." "This is my real job," she said. "Asking people for money isn't a job," I said. "It is, if you're good at it," she said. "And you think you're good at it," I said. "I'm talking to you, aren't I?" she said. "And I'm saying no, aren't I?" I said. The stalemate was obvious to everyone watching, and I could see some people actually smirking at Brittany's failed attempts to manipulate me. She had met her match in someone who knew all her tricks and wasn't afraid to call her out on them, but instead of backing down gracefully, she was doubling down on her attacks, getting louder and more aggressive with each exchange. She was like a cornered animal lashing out at anything within reach. "For now," she said lower. "But you'll come around." "No, I won't." I said. "You always do," she said. "Tom will make you." "Tom supports my decision," I said. "We'll see about that," she said. "Yes, we will," I said. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is," I said. This conversation is done." "You're going to regret this," she said. "The only thing I regret is wasting my time talking to you," I said. "You think you're so much better than me," she said. "I think I'm honest," I said, "which is more than I can say for you." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, thinking it might be Tom wondering where I was or one of my team members needing something. The name on the screen was my friend Jessica, who was at the event but had stepped outside to take a call. I almost ignored it, but something made me open the message. What I saw made my blood run cold and then burn with rage. It was a screenshot from Brittany's Instagram account posted just an hour ago. The photo showed her on a beach somewhere tropical, holding a cocktail, with the caption reading, "My new charity is helping me raise funds to get to the beach," with several laughing emojis. But that wasn't even the worst part. She had created an entire website for her fake charity, complete with photos of sad-looking dogs and cats, and a donation button that went directly to her personal PayPal account. The website claimed she was partnered with the Children's Hospital from tonight's event, and that all proceeds would benefit both animals and sick children. Jessica's tech said she had found the post because Brittany had been sending friend requests to everyone at the gala during the event. She was systematically targeting every wealthy person in attendance and had already gotten several of them to follow her back. Some had even commented on her post saying they would love to contribute to such a worthy cause. She was using my guest list as her personal database of marks. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She had screenshots of Brittany's website, which was clearly fraudulent with no registration numbers or legitimate charity information. She had the social media posts where Brittany was actively soliciting donations while standing at our event. She had even found previous posts where Brittany had bragged about her various scams, calling her victims stupid for falling for her tricks. It was everything needed to expose her completely. I looked up at Brittany, who was still standing there with that smug expression on her face, having no idea that I now had proof of exactly what she was doing. She thought she was so clever, using my event as a hunting ground for her marks. She thought she could embarrass me into submission and then work the room collecting money for her fake charity. She had no idea that she had just given me everything I needed to destroy her. "You know what?" I said, putting my phone in my pocket. "You're right. I am," she said, looking surprised. "Yes," I said. "I should be more supportive of your charity work." "Really?" she said suspiciously. "Absolutely," I said. "In fact, I think everyone should know about it." "What do you mean?" she said. "I mean that if you're doing such important work, then people should be aware," I said. "I guess that makes sense," she said slowly. "Why don't you wait right here?" I said. "I have someone you should meet." "Who?" she said. "Just wait," I said. "I'll be right back." I walked away from her, trying to keep my expression neutral, even though inside I was vibrating with anticipation. I found Marcus Chen, who was not only the local news anchor, but also one of my closest friends. He had been supporting the hospital charity for years and had emceed several of my events. He was currently talking to a group of donors near the silent auction tables, looking distinguished in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Marcus," I said, "I need to talk to you about something urgent." "Of course," he said, excusing himself from the group. "What's wrong?" "You know my sister-in-law, Brittany," I said. "The one Tom warned us about," he said. "That's the one," I said. "She's here tonight trying to run a scam." "What kind of scam?" he said. I showed him the screenshots on my phone and watched his expression change from concern to anger as he read through everything. He looked at the website and shook his head in disgust. As a journalist, he had seen plenty of scams, but using a children's hospital as cover for fraud was particularly offensive to him. He had done several investigative pieces on charity fraud and had no tolerance for people who exploited others' generosity. "This is criminal," he said. "I know," I said. "Hey, and she's here right now trying to get money from our donors." "Has she approached anyone yet?" he said. "She tried to get me to introduce her to people," I said. "When I refused, she made a scene." "I heard some yelling earlier," he said. "That was her." "Yes," I said. "She accused me of being selfish for not supporting her charity." "The fake charity," he said. "Exactly," I said. "But here's the thing. Marcus, she's been telling people she's affiliated with tonight's event." "She what?" he said. "Look at her Instagram," I said. "She's using photos from tonight to make it look legitimate." "I know. This is beyond unacceptable," he said. "Oh, we need to stop this now." "I agree," I said. But I don't want to cause more of a scene." "Leave it to me," he said. "I know exactly how to handle this." "What are you going to do?" I said. "I'm going to give her the spotlight she clearly wants," he said. "Just not in the way she expects." Marcus went straight to the AV team and showed them everything on his phone. I watched as their expressions changed from confusion to shock to anger. They immediately started pulling up Brittany's website and social media on their laptops, preparing to display it on the massive screens around the ballroom. Marcus then went to the stage and took the microphone, getting everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I hope you're all having a wonderful evening supporting our children's hospital." The crowd applauded and raised their glasses in agreement. "Your generosity tonight will help save lives," he said, "and provide hope to families during their darkest moments." More applause filled the room. "Which is why," he said, his tone becoming serious, "I need to address something that has come to my attention." The room grew quiet as people sensed the shift in mood. It has been brought to my attention that someone here tonight is attempting to exploit your generosity, he said. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people looked around, wondering who he was talking about. Someone who is not affiliated with our hospital or this event has been soliciting donations for a fraudulent charity, he said. The screens around the room suddenly lit up with Brittany's Instagram post and her fake charity website. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as people recognized her photos from earlier in the evening. The website, with its melodramatic music and obvious PayPal button, looked even more fraudulent when displayed on the massive screens. "This is not only illegal," Marcus said, "but it's a disgusting exploitation of your goodwill and the reputation of our hospital." I saw Brittany's face go white as she realized what was happening. She started backing toward the exit, but the crowd had pressed in to see the screens, and she was trapped. Everyone was staring at her now, recognizing her from the photos being displayed. Some people were taking pictures with their phones, and I knew this moment would be all over social media within minutes. If anyone here has been approached about donating to any charity other than the Children's Hospital, Marcus said, please know that it is a scam. The crowd was now actively looking at Brittany, who was trying to make herself invisible, but her designer dress and jewelry made her stand out like a beacon. Someone actually pointed at her and said loudly that she had tried to get his business card earlier. Another person said she had asked them about investment opportunities. The pieces were falling into place for everyone, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from confusion to anger. Furthermore, Marcus said, I want to make it absolutely clear that this person has no connection to tonight's event or to our wonderful organizer who has worked tirelessly to make this evening possible. He gestured toward me, and I felt hundreds of eyes turn in my direction, but this time with sympathy and support rather than the judgment Brittany had tried to create. People nodded in understanding, and several reached out to pat my arm or squeeze my shoulder in solidarity. They understood that I had been put in an impossible position by a family member, and they respected how I had handled it. We will be reporting this fraud to the appropriate authorities, Marcus said, and I encourage anyone who has been approached to come forward. The screens now showed a close-up of Brittany's face from her Instagram profile right next to the words fraud alert in bright red letters. Her phone number and email address from the website were displayed with warnings not to contact or provide any information to these accounts. The technical team had even found her previous failed businesses and displayed those as well, showing a clear pattern of deception. Now, Marcus said, his tone lightening, let's not let this unfortunate incident ruin our evening. Brittany finally managed to push through the crowd and ran toward the exit. Her designer heels clicked frantically on the marble floor as she fled with her head down and her face burning red with humiliation. Several people actually applauded as she left, and I heard someone say they were calling the police to report the fraud. The security guards at the door made note of her departure, and I knew they would have her photo within minutes to ensure she could never enter another event at this venue. The excitement in the room was palpable as people discussed what had just happened. Many came up to me to express their disgust at Brittany's behavior and their admiration for how I had handled it. The hospital director made a point of announcing that I had his complete trust and support, and that the hospital was lucky to have me as an advocate. Several donors increased their pledges, saying they wanted to show that real charity would always triumph over fraud. Tom found me a few minutes later and wrapped me in a huge hug. He had seen everything from across the room and was both horrified and impressed by how thoroughly Brittany had been exposed. He showed me his phone, which had dozens of missed calls and text messages from her, each one more desperate and angry than the last. She was demanding that he make me apologize and threatening to sue everyone involved. He deleted them all without reading them fully and blocked her number. The rest of the evening proceeded beautifully, with the auction raising more money than we had projected. People seemed energized by the drama and were more generous than usual, perhaps wanting to prove that good would triumph over greed. Marcus gave a closing speech about the importance of supporting legitimate charities and doing due diligence before donating to any cause. He praised me for my integrity and dedication, which earned another round of applause. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to personally thank me for organizing such a memorable event. Several joked that the entertainment had been worth the ticket price alone. One elderly donor whispered that she had always suspected something was off about Brittany and was glad someone had finally exposed her. She handed me an additional check for $10,000, saying it was specifically because I had protected the integrity of the event. The final tally for the evening was $800,000 raised for the Children's Hospital. It was more than double what we had raised the previous year, and the hospital administrator was practically in tears when she announced the total. She gave a special thanks to me and my team for our hard work and dedication to the cause. She also mentioned that the hospital would be implementing new security measures for future events to prevent similar situations. I checked my phone as we were leaving and saw that Brittany's Instagram had been deleted and her fake charity website was gone. Whether she had taken them down herself or they had been reported and removed, I didn't know and didn't care. What mattered was that she couldn't use them to scam anyone else. The local news had already picked up the story, and I knew it would be everywhere by morning. Tom's parents called early the next day, absolutely mortified by what they had learned. They had seen the news coverage and were devastated that Brittany had done something so cruel and illegal. They apologized profusely, even though it wasn't their fault, and promised they would no longer enable her behavior. They said Brittany had shown up at their house in the middle of the night demanding money for a lawyer, but they had refused and told her she had made her own bed. Over the next few days, the story exploded across social media and traditional news outlets. Marcus did a special segment on his show about charity fraud, featuring Brittany's case as a prime example of what to watch for. He didn't use her full name, but showed enough details that anyone who knew her would recognize her immediately. The segment was picked up by national news and became a cautionary tale that was shared thousands of times. The district attorney's office contacted me within a week to get my statement about what had happened. They were building a case against Brittany for wire fraud, charity fraud, and identity theft for claiming association with the hospital. The investigator told me that multiple people had already come forward saying they had donated to her fake charity before the gala, thinking it was legitimate. The total amount was over $50,000, which made it a serious federal crime. Brittany tried to launch a PR campaign claiming she had been misunderstood and that she really had intended to help animals. She created a video saying had orchestrated everything out of jealousy and that she was the real victim, but with all the evidence, including her own social media posts, so bragging about scamming people, no one believed her. The video was widely mocked and became a meme about entitled criminals trying to play victim. 3 months after the gala, Brittany was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud. The prosecutor had built an airtight case with evidence going back years, showing a pattern of deception and theft. They had found victims from 5 different states who had fallen for various versions of her schemes. Some had given her money for investments that never existed, while others had donated to fake charities she had created. The total amount was over $200,000, making this a major federal case. Tom and I had to testify before a grand jury about what we knew of Brittany's activities. It was exhausting going through years of her schemes and manipulations, but it was necessary to show the pattern of behavior. Tom provided financial records showing how much money he had given her over the years and how she had never paid any of it back, despite her promises. I provided all the screenshots and evidence from the gala showing how she had tried to use the event to legitimize her fraud. The trial was set for 6 months after the gala, and the media attention was intense. Reporters called, constantly wanting statements and interviews about the family drama behind the fraud case. We declined everything on the advice of our lawyer, but that didn't stop them from camping outside our house and following us to work. Gorge, the story had all the elements the media loved, including family betrayal, charity fraud, and a dramatic public exposure. During this time, Brittany tried every manipulation tactic she knew to get us to help her. She sent long emails claiming she was suicidal and that we would have blood on our hands if anything happened to her. She had friends call us saying she was having a mental breakdown and needed our support. She even had a fake therapist contact Tom saying Brittany needed family reconciliation as part of her treatment. We forwarded everything to the prosecutor, who added witness tampering to her charges. Tom's parents struggled with the situation but remained firm in their decision not to enable Brittany anymore. She had shown up at their house multiple times, begging for money for lawyers and trying to guilt them into taking out loans for her. When they refused, she had screamed at them, calling them terrible parents and blaming them for everything wrong in her life. They had to get a restraining order when she started showing up in the middle of the night, banging on their doors and windows. The trial began with Brittany trying to represent herself after no lawyer would take her case without payment up front. She showed up to court in clothes that were meant to make her look poor and sympathetic, but everyone could tell they were designer items she had, altered to look worn. She tried to cry on cue, but the tears seemed forced and the jury wasn't buying her performance. The prosecutor methodically presented evidence of her frauds going back 10 years. Victim after victim testified about how Brittany had convinced them to give her money with elaborate lies and fake documents. One elderly man broke down crying as he described how she had taken his life savings by pretending to be raising money for veterans. A single mother testified that Brittany had taken her children's college funds by promising to triple the money through investments. The stories were heartbreaking, and the jury looked disgusted as the pattern became clear. When it was my turn to testify, I simply told the truth about what had happened at the gala. I presented all the evidence of her fake charity and explained how she had tried to use the hospital's reputation to steal from generous donors. The prosecutor showed the jury the screenshots of her social media posts, where she had bragged about scamming people and laughed about how stupid they were. The jury members shook their heads in disbelief at her cruelty. Tom's testimony was even more damaging because he revealed years of family loans that were never repaid and schemes he had helped her escape from. He talked about how she had stolen from their grandmother and tried to take out credit cards in their parents' names. He explained how she'd always been given second chances, but had never changed her behavior. His voice broke when he said he loved his sister, but couldn't enable her criminal behavior anymore. Brittany tried to cross-examine both of us, but her questions were rambling and made no sense. She accused me of being jealous of her beauty and success, which caused several jury members to actually laugh. She claimed Tom had been brainwashed by me and that our marriage was built on lies about her. She presented no evidence for any of her claims, and the judge had to warn her multiple times about making baseless accusations. The most damaging testimony came from a forensic accountant who had traced Brittany's finances. He showed that she had never filed taxes on any of the money she had stolen and had spent it all on luxury items and vacations. He had photos from her social media showing her on beaches around the world at the exact times she was claiming to be broke and needing help. The jury could see clearly that she had been living a lavish lifestyle funded entirely by her victims. Brittany took the stand in her own defense, which her court-appointed advisor had strongly recommended against. She tried to spin a story about being a misunderstood entrepreneur who had simply had bad luck with investments. But when the prosecutor started asking specific questions about where the money had gone, she couldn't answer. She claimed she didn't remember or that records had been lost, but it was obvious she was lying. Her story changed multiple times, even within the same answer. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating. He laid out 20 years of lies and fraud, showing how Brittany had evolved from small scams to major federal crimes. He showed how she had specifically targeted vulnerable people, including the elderly and single parents. He emphasized how she had shown no remorse and had even bragged about her crimes on social media. He asked the jury to hold her accountable for the pain she had caused so many people. Brittany's closing argument was a rambling mess where she blamed everyone but herself. She claimed I had orchestrated everything because I was threatened by her success. She said Tom had abandoned her because I had poisoned him against his family. She accused her parents of abuse and neglect that had forced her to become self-sufficient. She even blamed society for not recognizing her genius and forcing her to take extreme measures to survive. The jury looked completely unconvinced. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours, which the prosecutor said was remarkably fast for such a complex case. Brittany was found guilty on all counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, charity, fraud, and identity theft. The judge allowed victims to give impact statements before sentencing, and the courtroom was packed with people Brittany had hurt. Many cried as they described how her crimes had affected their lives and their ability to trust others. The judge sentenced Brittany to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release for 5 years. He also ordered her to pay full restitution to all her victims, though everyone knew she would never have that kind of money. He said, her lack of remorse and the calculated nature of her crimes warranted a harsh sentence. He specifically mentioned the charity fraud at the gala as being particularly heinous because it undermined public trust in legitimate charitable organizations. Like, Brittany screamed when the sentence was read, claiming it was unfair and that she was being persecuted. She had to be physically removed from the courtroom by bailiffs as she hurled threats at me, Tom, the prosecutor, and the judge. Her last words before the door closed were that she would get revenge on everyone who had wronged her. The threats were added to her file and would be considered if she ever came up for parole. The media coverage of the verdict was extensive, with many outlets using it as an example of justice being served. Marcus did a follow-up segment about the importance of protecting charitable giving from fraudsters. He interviewed several legitimate charities who said donations had actually increased since the trial, as people felt more confident that fraudsters would be caught and prosecuted. The Children's Hospital reported record donations in the months following the trial. Tom and I thought we could finally move on with our lives, but Brittany continued to cause problems even from prison. She found ways to make phone calls to extended family members, telling them lies about horrible things that were supposedly happening to her. She claimed she was being abused by guards and other inmates, though investigations found no evidence of this. She started writing letters to reporters claiming she had been framed and offering to tell her story for money. A year into her sentence, we learned that Brittany had been running new scams from inside prison. She had convinced other inmates to let her use their phone privileges to call people from a list she had memorized. She was pretending to be calling from various charities and government agencies, telling people they owed money or had won prizes that required fees to claim. She had managed to steal another $30,000 before being caught. Her sentence was extended by 3 more years, and she was moved to a higher security facility. She lost all phone and mail privileges except for legal correspondence. She was put in solitary confinement for her own protection after she tried to scam the wrong inmate, someone connected to organized crime who didn't appreciate being targeted. The reports we received suggested she was not adjusting well to the harsh reality of consequences. Tom's parents aged visibly during this time. They blamed themselves for enabling Brittany for so long, even though we assured them it wasn't their fault. They started attending therapy to deal with their guilt and grief over losing their daughter to her criminal choices. They said the hardest part was accepting that the daughter they thought they had never really existed, and that Brittany had always been manipulative, even as a child. So 2 years after the trial, we decided to move to a new city for a fresh start. Tom had received an amazing job offer, and I was ready to expand my event planning business to a new market. And we didn't tell anyone in his family except his parents where we were going. We needed distance from the chaos and drama that Brittany had brought into our lives. The move was exactly what we needed to heal and build our future without the shadow of her crimes hanging over us. In our new city, I built my business carefully, selecting clients and causes that aligned with my values. Every charity I worked with was thoroughly vetted, and I implemented strict protocols to prevent fraud at any event I organized. My reputation for integrity and security attracted high-profile clients who appreciated the peace of mind I provided. Within 2 years, I was running one of the most successful event planning companies in the state. Tom thrived in his new position and quickly made partner at his firm. He specialized in financial fraud cases, using what he had learned from Brittany's crimes to help other victims. He became known as someone who would fight tirelessly for people who had been scammed, and he recovered millions of dollars for clients over the years. He said something good had to come from the pain Brittany had caused, and helping other victims was his way of making meaning from it. We had 2 children during this time and were careful to raise them with strong values about honesty and empathy. We taught them about consequences and the importance of taking responsibility for their actions. We used age appropriate versions of what had happened with Brittany as teaching moments about character and choices. They grew up understanding that family didn't mean accepting harmful behavior, and that standing up for what's right was more important than keeping peace. 5 years after the trial, we heard that Brittany had been released on parole. She had served 8 years of her 11-year sentence and was released for good behavior, though we knew that just meant she hadn't been caught doing anything else. She was required to wear an ankle monitor and report to a parole officer weekly. She was banned from using the internet or having any involvement with charitable organizations. She had to get approval to work and could only take jobs that didn't involve handling money. Tom's parents told us that Brittany had tried to contact them, but they had maintained their boundaries. She had nowhere to go, and no one willing to help her. She ended up in a halfway house for ex-convicts, where she had to follow strict rules and curfews. She was required to attend therapy and job training programs. Reports from family members suggested she was bitter and angry, blaming everyone else for her situation, and showing no real change in her mindset. 6 months after her release, Brittany violated her parole by trying to run a romance scam through the mail. She had convinced someone at the halfway house to let her use their address to receive letters from lonely people she had somehow contacted. She was promising love and marriage in exchange for money orders. She had collected about $5,000 before her parole officer discovered what she was doing during a routine check. She was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of her original sentence, plus 5 more years for the new crimes. This time, there would be no parole and no early release. She would be in her 50s by the time she got out and would have spent most of her adult life in prison. The judge said she had proven herself incapable of rehabilitation and was a permanent danger to society. The Children's Hospital continued to thrive with the support from our galas and other fundraising efforts. They were able to build a new wing dedicated to pediatric cancer treatment and research. They named it after a young patient who had been saved by equipment purchased with funds from that dramatic gala where Brittany had been exposed. Every time I visited and saw that plaque, I thought about how something beautiful had come from something so ugly. Marcus remained a close friend, and we collaborated on several charity events over the years. He had won awards for his reporting on charity fraud and had become a national expert on the subject. He often said that the night at the gala had been a turning point in his career, leading him to focus on investigative journalism that protected vulnerable people. He had exposed dozens of scammers over the years and helped recover millions in stolen funds. 10 years after the gala, I was invited to speak at a national conference on nonprofit management. I told the story of what had happened with Brittany and how it had led to better security measures and fraud prevention in the charity sector. The audience was riveted by the drama, but more importantly, they took away valuable lessons about vigilance and the importance of protecting donors and legitimate causes. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said her mother had been one of Brittany's victims and had lost her retirement savings to one of the investment scams. She thanked me for exposing Brittany and helping to get justice for victims like her mother. She said her family had received partial restitution from assets seized during the investigation, and it had helped her mother avoid losing her home. Stories like that reminded me that standing up to Brittany hadn't just been about protecting the gala or my reputation. It had been about protecting real people from real harm. Every dollar Brittany stole was money someone had worked hard for and had chosen to give in good faith. Every person she scammed was someone who would struggle to trust again. The ripple effects of her crimes extended far beyond the immediate victims. Tom and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary by establishing a foundation to help fraud victims recover both financially and emotionally. We funded counseling services and legal aid for people who'd been scammed. We created educational programs to help people recognize and avoid fraudsters. We named it the Truth and Trust Foundation, and it became our way of turning our painful experience into something that could help others. The foundation's first major initiative was creating a database of known charity scams and fraudsters that donors could check before giving money. We worked with law enforcement and legitimate charities to verify information and keep the database updated. Within its first year, the database had prevented an estimated $10 million from going to fraudulent causes. It was satisfying to know that Brittany's crimes had led to systems that would prevent others from doing the same thing. We occasionally heard updates about Brittany through family channels. She had apparently become something of a cautionary tale in prison, with new inmates being warned about her tendency to try to involve people in schemes. She had been moved multiple times for causing problems and had spent significant time in solitary confinement. Her health was deteriorating from the stress of imprisonment, and she had aged dramatically, according to those who had seen recent photos. Tom struggled with complicated feelings about his sister's fate. He knew she had brought it on herself, but it was still painful to know she would spend most of her life in prison. He had dreams sometimes, where she was a child again before the lying and manipulating started. He wondered if there had ever been a point where she could have chosen a different path, or if she had always been destined for this outcome. His parents passed away within a year of each other, never having reconciled with Brittany. They left her a small amount in their will, but stipulated it could only be used for therapy or education, not given as cash. The rest of their estate was divided among their other children and donated to various charities, including the Children's Hospital. Even in death, they maintained the boundaries they had finally learned to set. When Brittany learned about her parents' deaths and the contents of their will, she apparently had a complete breakdown. She had always assumed that eventually they would forgive her and bail her out one more time. The reality that she had permanently lost her family and any chance of financial support seemed to finally break through her delusions. Prison reports indicated she had stopped trying to run scams and had become withdrawn and quiet. 15 years after the gala, I received a letter forwarded through our lawyer. It was from Brittany, and it was different from any communication we had received before. There was no blame or manipulation, just what appeared to be genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. She said she had finally understood the harm she had done and wanted to apologize. She didn't ask for forgiveness or help, just wanted us to know she was sorry. Tom and I discussed whether to respond, but ultimately decided not to. Too much damage had been done, and we had worked too hard to build a life free from her chaos. We wished her well in our hearts, but knew that any contact would only reopen old wounds. The letter went into a file with all the other documentation from that chapter of our lives, and we moved forward. Our children grew into successful adults with strong moral compasses and a desire to help others. Our daughter became a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse and fraud cases. Our son became a social worker helping victims of crime rebuild their lives. They both said that knowing what had happened with their aunt had inspired them to fight against those who prey on vulnerable people. The event planning company I'd built became the gold standard for charity fundraisers. We expanded to multiple cities and trained hundreds of event planners in fraud prevention and donor protection. Every contract included strict security measures and verification requirements. We had prevented dozens of attempted scams over the years and had helped law enforcement catch several fraudsters who tried to infiltrate our events. The Children's Hospital grew into one of the leading pediatric treatment centers in the country. The funds raised through years of galas had contributed to groundbreaking research in life-saving treatments. Thousands of children had been helped because generous donors had trusted us to use their money properly. Every success story was a reminder that good had triumphed over the evil Brittany had tried to bring into that space. 20 years after that dramatic gala, I stood in the same ballroom preparing for another fundraiser. The venue had been renovated, but the basic layout was the same. I could still remember exactly where Brittany had stood when Marcus exposed her fraud on the screens. I could still see her face as she realized her schemes had finally caught up with her. But mostly I remembered the generosity of the donors who had increased their gifts that night to show that charity would always defeat greed. The event that night raised $5 million for the Children's Hospital. There were no disruptions, no drama, and no attempts at fraud. The security measures were so seamlessly integrated that most guests didn't even notice them. It was exactly the kind of elegant, successful event I had always envisioned before Brittany had tried to destroy it. The peace and joy of the evening was what charity events were supposed to be about. As I watched the guests celebrating and supporting such a worthy cause, I thought about how different things might have been if I hadn't received that text message 20 years ago. If Jessica hadn't sent me those screenshots, I might have just endured Brittany's harassment and let her work the room. She might have scammed dozens of people and destroyed the reputation of the hospital and my career. That one text had changed everything and given me the power to stop her. The truth really had been the perfect revenge that night. Brittany had created her own downfall with her greed and hubris. All I had done was shine a light on what she was doing and let the consequences unfold naturally. She had wanted attention and recognition, and she had gotten it, just not in the way she had planned. The public humiliation had been complete and devastating, exactly what she deserved for trying to exploit people's generosity. The impact of that night continued to ripple outward in positive ways. The protocols developed to prevent charity fraud had been adopted nationwide. The awareness raised about scammers had made donors more vigilant, but also more confident in giving to verified organizations. The Children's Hospital had become a symbol of how legitimate charities could thrive when protected from those who would exploit them. My marriage to Tom had grown stronger through the ordeal. We had stood together against his own sister and supported each other through the stress of trials and media attention. We had built a new life in a new city and raised wonderful children. We had turned a painful experience into purpose through our foundation and our work. We had proven that love and integrity could overcome manipulation, and greed. The story of Brittany's downfall had become something of a legend in charity. Circle's event planners studied it as a cautionary tale about the importance of security and verification. Law enforcement used it as an example of how fraudsters operate and how to catch them. Legitimate charities referenced it when explaining why they had certain procedures in place. It had become bigger than just a family drama and had contributed to real systemic change. Looking back, I realized that Brittany had actually done us a favor in a twisted way. Her spectacular failure had immunized us against future scammers. Her public humiliation had established my reputation as someone who wouldn't tolerate fraud. Her crimes had led to better systems that protected thousands of people. Her imprisonment had removed a toxic influence from our lives, allowing us to thrive. Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes. The final irony was that Brittany had achieved exactly what she had always wanted, which was fame and recognition. She was famous as one of the most notorious charity fraudsters in modern history. She was recognized in criminal justice textbooks and fraud prevention seminars. Her name was synonymous with greed and deception. She had gotten the attention she craved, just not in the way she had imagined when she walked into that gala 20 years ago. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, I stood in the empty ballroom, reflecting on the journey. From that horrible confrontation with Brittany to this moment of triumph, the path had been difficult, but ultimately rewarding. Justice had been served, victims had been helped, and good had prevailed over evil. The text message that had exposed her scheme had been the catalyst for so much positive change that it was almost worth the pain we had endured. The truth was that Brittany had been her own worst enemy. Her greed had blinded her to the consequences of her actions. Her narcissism had made her believe she was smarter than everyone else. Her lack of empathy had allowed her to hurt people without remorse, and her hubris had led her to target the one event where she would be completely exposed. She had orchestrated her own downfall, and we had simply been the instruments of justice. That night at my charity event, when my sister-in-law asked everyone to help her raise money, she had no idea that her own social media posts would provide the evidence to destroy her. She had thought she was being clever, using technology to expand her scams, but technology had been her undoing. The text message I received had been perfectly timed to prevent her from victimizing anyone else that night. It had been poetic justice delivered through a smartphone screen. The revenge had been complete and satisfying in a way I could never have planned. Watching her run from the ballroom in humiliation while her fraud was displayed on giant screens had been cathartic. Seeing her sentenced to years in prison had brought closure. Knowing she would never be able to hurt anyone else with her schemes brought peace. The truth had been the ultimate weapon against her lies, and it had won decisively. As I turned off the lights in the ballroom and headed home to Tom and our children, I felt nothing but gratitude. Grateful for Jessica, who had sent that text. Grateful for Marcus, who had exposed the fraud so publicly. Grateful for the justice system that had held Brittany accountable. Grateful for Tom's support through it all. And grateful that good people had continued to support legitimate charities despite one person's attempt to exploit their generosity. The Children's Hospital would continue its life-saving work. Future events would be protected from fraudsters. Victims would receive help and support. And Brittany would serve her time knowing that her one attempt to infiltrate my charity gala had led to her complete and total downfall. The text message that night had changed everything and given me the perfect revenge served ice cold in front of everyone who mattered.